Welcome to Scary Savannah and Beyond.
So now let's talk about the Sorrel-Weed House. Located on the edge of Madison Square in Savannah stands a magnificent Greek Revival-style Sorrel-Weed House. The home was originally built for wealthy shipping merchant Francis Sorrel in 1840 and was designed by famous architect Charles Kluski. Francis Sorrel was born in Santo Domingo, which is now Haiti, in 1793. And this is the only photograph that I could find of him. So he's like an old man. So I don't know.
He doesn't look anything like I anticipated him looking.
You've seen him on the walls of his house many times.
I have, but that doesn't mean that this is what I thought he was going to look like. I just figured he would have a cape on.
Well, he probably does. That looks like he could have a cape on.
He could have a cape on. That might be a cape.
It might be. So I don't know if you're familiar where Haiti is. But I gave you a map here so you can see in relation.
Right there in that Dominican Republic.
Yeah, it's in between Cuba and Puerto Rico. You've got Haiti and the Dominican Republic.
A lot of baseball players coming from this region, I imagine, don't they?
They're very talented. His father was Colonel Antoine Francois Sorrel, who served in the French army. His mother was believed to be a free woman of color from Haiti. Unfortunately, she died shortly after his birth. Mm-hmm. This made Francis mixed race, or what they called at that time a mulatto. He hid this fact and was light-skinned enough to pass as a white man. His father ran a sugar plantation in Haiti, but was often away. When Francis was a young boy, and while his father was away, there was a slave revolt in Haiti, and Francis was nearly killed. He was only around 5 years old, and one of his nurses hid him and was able to sneak him away to Port-au-Prince, where he was cared for by her relatives. As a young man, approximately 19 years old, he was working as a clerk for a shipping company in Port-au-Prince. He was quite good at his job, so the firm sent him to their branch in Baltimore, Maryland. Francis was determined to be a wealthy American and worked hard at his job in Maryland, quickly rising up the ranks. In 1819, at age 24, he moved to Savannah, where he formed a business with a man named Henry Douglas, who was a supervisor at his job, so they decided to branch out on their own. They advertised their shipping business in local newspapers, and although cotton, whiskey, butter, flour, salt, and things of that nature were their main imports, they also dealt in a much darker trade, humans. Slaves were a very valuable commodity in the South following the Revolutionary War, and Francis Sorrel and Henry Douglas took advantage of the opportunity. And it really surprises me that someone who's of mixed race would think selling other humans is okay. It's hard to imagine anyone would think that's okay, but to think that your own mother was once a slave and then you were saved by slaves.
Well,
and then
sometimes
to turn and do
capitalism,
the same thing.
and I'm not saying capitalism is wrong, but sometimes people value money more than they look at the value of other people. And I guess they can maybe compartmentalize and be like, well, it's not happening to me, so I don't have to think about it. Right. So, yeah, okay, sure.
Oftentimes, people would marry into wealthy families to improve their own social standings, and it just so happened that Francis's partner, Henry Douglas, came from a wealthy family. It's convenient.
It is. It's almost like it was meant to be in some horrific sense.
Henry had a 17-year-old niece named Lucinda Ireland Moxley, and on September 5th, 1822, Francis, who would have been around 29 at that time, married the young woman, solidifying his status as a wealthy businessman in the United States. This afforded him the chance to officially become a U.S. citizen, because he wasn't, So
I mean,
that was his dream.
Multiple benefits from that arrangement, it sounds like. I wonder if she was into that.
I don't know. With his acquired wealth and status, he began buying up property in Savannah. But sadly, his wife Lucinda died in 1827 of yellow fever, just 5 years or so into the marriage.
Oh, that's awful. But that is the Savannah of the 1800s.
Probably for business reasons more than love, Francis married Lucinda's younger sister, Matilda Aminta Douglas Moxley, 2 years later. Between his two marriages, he had 11 children. However, as was common at the time, several of them did not survive childhood. Matilda was the mother of 8 of those children.
Wow.
And from what I've read, only 5 of Matilda's children survived. I think all 3 of Lucinda's survived. This left her understandably devastated, and she struggled with her mental health throughout their marriage. Like I said earlier, Francis Sorrel was a very successful merchant and grew quite wealthy, and he moved his large family into the Sorrel-Weed home located on the corner of Bull and Harris Streets. The home is quite opulent, featuring the finest of furnishings. It was the gathering spot for the high society of Savannah, even hosting Robert E. Lee on more than one occasion.
Wow, we were sitting in a place where somebody I've heard of's been. That's a big deal.
It is. It'd be even cooler if John Wayne ever visited there.
How do you know he didn't?
I don't know.
He did come to this city at some point. Or is that Clint Eastwood?
Clint Eastwood has been here recently.
Okay.
We told you in a previous episode that the story we heard was as follows. One busy day in 1860, while preparations were being made for yet another party, Matilda was searching for her head servant, a young girl named Molly. She couldn't locate her in the house, so she made her way across the courtyard to the carriage house where the slaves were housed. Molly, who was favored by Matilda, had her own private room, which was unusual. Unfortunately, it seemed, she was also favored by Francis, and much to Matilda's shock, she found her husband in Molly's bed.
Ooh.
Unable to cope with what she had seen, she ran back to the main home, made her way up the stairs, and jumped to her death on the courtyard below, much to the horror of all around. A few weeks later, Molly was found hanging from a rope in her bedroom. It was speculated that she had either committed suicide or was killed by Francis in order to keep her quiet about what his wife had seen. Suicide was a very taboo subject at the time, and it's likely this would have been detrimental to the social standings of the Sorrel family.
And we certainly can't affect the social standing.
Another theory is that she was hung by her fellow slaves who blamed her for Matilda's death. We've also heard that possibly Francis pushed Matilda from the balcony and that he was covering that up.
Yeah, there are multiple different versions of this story we have discovered, right?
So this is a story we've heard countless times from tour guides and TV shows. And we've investigated the main house and the carriage house on several occasions. We've heard EVPs that seem to lend credence to that something tragic happened in this home. However, I've been researching and I found several accounts, including a very exhaustive account from a woman who was seeking permission to excavate the floor of the carriage house to see if there were bones, possibly of Molly, underneath. So what it was this woman named Kelly Westfield, and she was a student at Armstrong, which is now Georgia Southern, and for her final project in historical archaeology, she wanted to excavate the basement of the carriage house of the Sorrel-Weed House because there's a depression in the floor, as you can see in this photo, and it was unexplained, and they wanted to see what was under there.
That seems like a very interesting thing that I would think somebody would be like, yeah, let's do that.
So she did, and she went into great detail, and she searched records and produced evidence that the Sorrels no longer even lived at the house when Matilda died in 1860.
Ooh, that sounds like it might throw a monkey wrench in some of the stories I've heard.
Mm-hmm. In fact, they had moved next door after selling the home in 1859 to Henry D. Weed, hence the name Sorrel-Weed House. We're going to link her paper in our show notes, so if you really want to take a deep dive into the history of the house as well as what Savannah was experiencing in the mid-1800s, you need to check that out. It's fascinating.
Well, let me ask you this. I haven't read it, and you have. Does she provide a bunch of substantial documentation and evidence to back up her findings? Because
Yes.
I would think that this is something that has been critiqued by somebody, and she's got, well, this is the bill of sale.
Right.
This is the dates, the death certificates, whatever it takes to back up her claims.
She does.
Well, then it sounds like a paper you should be reading.
Yeah, it's exhaustive. The Sorrels didn't move far from the home, though. They moved into the adjacent house at 12 Harris Street, which is equally as creepy at night as we saw the other night.
We found that out because it's literally right there beside the house. You could throw a rock and hit the house. Heck, you could throw me and hit the house.
While we were sitting in Madison Square the other night, the story I overheard from a tour guide this time was that while living in the home next door, Matilda awoke one night and her husband wasn't next to her. She went looking for him and found him with Molly in the carriage house of this new house.
Oh, so not the Sorrel-Weed House, but the house they're living in.
The house next door.
The West Harris.
Right. She then jumped from the balcony of this home, which led to a concussion, ultimately causing her death.
That's a story I haven't heard yet.
This is likely closer to the truth as evidenced in a letter written by Charles C. Jones, Jr., who was a friend and associate of Francis Sorrel. He wrote the following in a letter to his mother.
Also, historical documentation of a particular fact you're sharing.
Right.
That's an important thing to note. The sad news has reached the office that Mrs. Sorrel, probably in a fit of lunacy, sprang from the second or third story window of her residence on Harris Street, next door to the house, which was the family mansion for so many years, falling upon the pavement of the yard and by the concussion, terminating her life.
So it seems this is more likely what transpired. Now, whether she caught her husband or she just had suspicions or was struggling with mental health issues for other reasons like the deaths of her children, no one knows for sure. In a letter from Charles C. Jones Jr.'s mother responding to him, she said, "The death of Mrs. Sorrel was very distressing. I heard some time since that she was subject to great mental depressions. We are not sufficiently grateful for our preserved reason. Our commonest blessings are of our greatest. We need only to be deprived of them to feel it so." So they're saying, yeah, she was struggling with mental health, but they don't say exactly why, because he probably...
Well, you know what? Something I've learned is it doesn't necessarily have to have a reason. Mental health is not necessarily chained or tied to experience in your life. Sometimes you're just depressed.
True, but what would just all of a sudden cause her to run up on the balcony and jump if there wasn't some catalyst?
Well, probably was a catalyst to make her do the thing she did, but I imagine she could have just had a state of depression that was just present because it's present, and maybe being triggered by a traumatic thing caused her to do something that she might not normally do.
Now, another thing we need to know is, was there actually a slave named Molly? Did they own a slave named Molly?
And did Molly exist?
Right.
That's a big, important thing to ask in a story where that's pretty much what you hear from everybody.
Yeah, well, it seems she did. There is a record of a slave manifest naming a slave named Molly, aged 26, belonging to Francis Sorrel. However, it appears the manifest showing her being sent from Savannah to New York City in 1857, which is 3 years before Matilda died. And I don't know if she returned. There's no evidence that she did. I don't know how accurate the records were, but there is no record of her returning to Savannah. Oh. So this is an actual document.
Ooh, a signed
showing Molly,
document.
female, 26. And it says it's bound from Savannah for New York.
Well, could there have been more than one Molly?
There could have been, but this is the only documented Molly that he owned.
Well, maybe. You know, I'm going to jump out on a ledge here, or off a ledge, as I tend to do, and say maybe not everything was documented.
That's
like
also
it ought
true.
to have been documented.
That is also true. So either way, it would not have been uncommon for a slave owner to have non-consensual relations with a female slave. It was a huge problem of the time, as evidenced by the population of mixed people numbering around 2,000 in 1860.
So at the time, none of that would have been a consensual thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So was he messing around with a young slave woman? Probably, but we just don't know for sure. And we don't know that it was the direct cause for Matilda's suicide. Her official cause of death was concussion. No one wanted to say the word suicide. However, Matilda was not buried in Laurel Grove Cemetery, where later her husband and children would be buried. It was common for those who committed suicide to be buried away from the family plots because of the stigma.
That's kind of sad, really.
Mm-hmm. We were at Laurel Grove last year, and we saw the family crypt. It's quite elaborate, and it's dedicated to Francis and Matilda by their children.
Yeah, we found it by accident. We weren't even looking for it.
Yeah, we didn't even realize they were there.
I was going there to get the Jingle Bell guy.
Yeah.
And we just stumbled upon this, and I was like, that looks kind of elaborate. What is it? And turns out it is just pertaining to this story.
It does seem that Francis did feel guilt over his wife's death and took some responsibility, as evidenced in a letter written by Francis to his son, Alexander Claxton.
How my dear and beloved wife would have enjoyed this visit of our friends if her life have been preserved, and how much more comfortable she would have made them than I have been enabled to do. But I must not enlarge on this sorrowful subject. The Lord has bereaved me and laid his chastening rod heavily upon me, and I must submit.
They really wrote eloquently,
I'm telling you, these people back then, they talk some kind of other way.
So is he feeling remorse for his actions with other women, or the fact that he didn't seek help for her depression? We just don't know. But he was...
Or both.
Seemingly, upset, and that he felt guilt and that God was...
I'm sure he probably
punishing
did.
him.
Just because people can do things doesn't mean that they don't eventually realize, hey, perhaps I was in the wrong, and now I feel bad about this.
So again, we'll likely never know the true story, but what we do know is that the square where the home sits was the site of the bloodiest battle of the Revolutionary War, the Siege of Savannah. And we know that there is supernatural activity occurring at the old Sorrel-Weed House. Is it the spirits of Matilda, Francis, and Molly, or possibly the soldiers who were buried in a mass grave underneath the square? We've had several experiences ourselves, and we're going to talk about those now. On our previous investigation, we had a tour guide named Janie. She told us a little about the Siege of Savannah, and we're going to play that clip for you now.
And the Revolutionary War in Savannah was fought right outside in what is now Madison Square. In fact, the bloodiest hour of the entire revolution was fought outside on October 9th, 1779, during the siege of Savannah. There are roughly 2,000 patriots buried in a mass grave right outside our front door. And while that bloody battle was being fought, the British officers were living here on this land, and this is where they died. It's actually widely believed that if we were to dig underneath the foundation of this house tonight, that we would find the remains of those British officers under our feet right now. That could be why we experience them as spirits. Some people believe that spirits attach themselves to tangible objects. So if their bones, or their teeth, or fragments of their uniform, pieces of their bayonets are still underneath us, then maybe a portion of their energy does remain here with those remains.
Yeah, so an estimated 2,000 bodies all buried in one place, that could be an explanation for the amount of activity people experience here.
It definitely could. And this is something that we've come to understand about Savannah or anywhere. Just because you're told a story about who supposedly lived there and may or may not have, and the story they tell you may or may not be 100% factually true, might be for entertainment purposes mostly, that doesn't mean that perhaps there aren't other spirits
Something
or other
is
energies
going on there.
that is there, and maybe you're just trying to interpret it as what you think it is, and maybe it's something completely different.
When you enter the front of the 16,000 square foot mansion, you'll start in the foyer. To the left are the joint men's and women's parlors with pocket doors that would be closed at some point during the evenings so the men could smoke cigars, drink bourbon, and talk business, while the women could discuss upcoming social events and talk about their families. Like we said earlier, Robert E. Lee was among the guests once entertained by the Sorrels. Here's a clip of Janie again.
This house was the party house of Savannah during its time. Everybody who was anybody wanted to come party inside of these rooms. Even Robert E. Lee, who's all over this museum, is documented as having been here. Robert E. Lee danced on these Georgia pine floors that we're standing on right now.
I wonder if he really danced on those old Georgia pines.
He doesn't look like much of a dancer.
Well, see, that's where you're wrong. The man is definitely a subdued dancer. He's holding back.
I could see him breaking out.
He's holding back. You don't give him everything all at once. You got to hold something back.
On our most recent tour, we were divided into small groups, so it was just us and one other couple, and we sat down on the antique furniture next to the table.
The table we said we could be seated at.
Yeah, they said they
told
tell
us
you,
where we could
there's
sit. We weren't just randomly sitting on furniture.
Yeah, some places you can't sit. On the table was a cat ball. It's one of those little light-up balls that cats play with. So if it's moved, it's supposed to light up. If it's stationary, it should not light up.
It's fairly sensitive. It doesn't take much to set it off, but it does take something. It doesn't just go off on its own.
We also had an app that's supposed to let spirits use the energy of the phone to form words.
That's the rumor.
Guests have reported smelling cigar smoke in the room, despite the fact that the home is non-smoking, of course, these days.
Well, I did ask him in that room if I was allowed to smoke cigars, and Francis Sorrel himself told me yes. Now, I
but
didn't.
You didn't.
I didn't because I didn't have any with me, but I just want to say Francis Sorrel seems to be okay with it, so we need to address this in the future.
Others have claimed to have captured figures in the large mirrors that don't belong. Do you remember the one with the two sisters?
Yeah, that was terrifying.
There was like two sisters, and their father was taking a picture of them, and it was just the two of them. And then when they looked at the picture, there's like a scary Rob Zombie-looking creature standing with them.
Yeah, it's like Rob Zombie mixed with Swamp Thing, and I don't want to meet either one of them in real life.
Yeah, so the
Rob
girls,
Zombie or Swamp Thing.
The girls were freaked out by that.
Yeah.
On one wall above a piano is a portrait of one of the Sorrel's sons, Civil War Confederate Brigadier General G. Moxley Sorrel, who was quite a character. He seemed to have an affinity for the ladies. They say he was very handsome.
You think?
Yeah. And there are often reports of women being touched in this room. He didn't seem to approve of me or the other lady being in the men's parlor, however.
Okay.
We're going to play a clip of what we captured with our spirit app.
Yeah, this is the most misogynistic ghost we've ever met.
Yeah, he is.
I heard you like the women.
Can you make this ball light up?
Can you make this ball light up for these beautiful ladies in the room?
They'll be impressed.
So
Oh, I can't even tell you how much impression you'd make.
Dishwasher.
He just called y'all dishwashers.
Wait. Did she say that he was like a misogynist?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. He's dissing. I said, look at these two lovely ladies in this room, and he's like,
suitcase. Get your suitcase and get out.
He doesn't like us.
I know a good Southern gentleman's going to want everyone to know what his name is. Honda.
Honda?
You would not know that
We
word.
drive a Honda.
Are you trying to tell me you know who I am?
He said, get your suitcase and get in your Honda. And
Okay.
So I guess he didn't seem very pleased to have us ladies in there. He wanted us to go wash some dishes, is what we gathered from that.
Yeah, and then he told you to pack your suitcase and get in your Honda.
He did. He knew he drove a Honda. Across from the men's parlor is Francis's study. In one corner is an antique desk. There's a bar on one wall where they set up a REM pod.
Okay, a REM pod is a device that we've talked about on the show before, but it looks like a big hockey puck, got a antenna on it and several LED lights of different colors.
Bunch of pretty lights.
Bunch of pretty lights. That's why it's one of my favorite pieces of equipment I've seen people use. We don't own one. But what it does is it measures the proximity of something to the antenna on the probe. So I'm assuming it works under a capacitive principle. So if it has something that comes in close enough to it that it basically completes a circuit, then it's going to alarm. And depending on how much energy is transferred there, it will do it at different levels. So it could just like beep, 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 but it can really go off at different frequencies and thresholds. So you can see if something is touching that antenna, that means there is something there.
And if you're on the other side of the room, there's no reason it should go off.
No, there's
Something
no reason
has
it should
to
go
touch
off,
it.
even if you're standing within a few feet of it.
Yeah.
You have to get close enough to the antenna for it to be able to sense your presence. So it they're
pretty sensitive.
They do go off occasionally, and it may malfunction. But when they go off and they're really going off, you know it.
On our first investigative tour, it was a much larger group, and we all stood around in a circle in the room in Francis's study, and both of us felt off balance, kind of like you're swaying.
Yeah, almost like you'd been drinking a little too much.
Yeah.
Which we had not been, of course.
We thought it was just us. This was very early on in our ghost hunting experiences, but then Janie told us this.
Over the last maybe 11 months or so now, more and more commonly, I've had so many people report feeling really unbalanced in this room. The first time that I was made aware of it, I had a guest standing over here in this corner who suddenly just got down on the floor, and I was like, oh, are you okay? And she told us that her equilibrium was knocked off, so she was trying to make herself small and close to the floor. It's very clever. I haven't had anybody else get down on the floor, not yet, but I am hearing about this on a weekly basis at this point. I do not talk about this on my shorter tours. And on those tours, I have guests come up to me later in the night and they'll say, this is gonna sound weird, but when we were in the study, was the floor vibrating? No, the floor isn't vibrating, but if you feel like it is, or if you feel a bit off kilter, you're not alone. And if you aren't feeling off kilter, there's time yet. We'll see if something happens.
So that was a really weird sensation. The only time I've ever felt that before was in Zach Bagan's museum in the Jack Kevorkian room, which you didn't feel.
I didn't feel it. I don't feel anything.
Well,
I have
you
zero
felt it here.
sensitivity. Let's don't talk about that. You're going to make me feel things in our own room. We already had the
No,
producer
I mean, you felt
barking.
it in the parlor.
I did feel that. So it must have been really,
Really
really
strong.
present for me to feel it.
Yeah.